Hey everybody, Economic Ninja here. I hope you're doing great. We have an emergency out of Japan. It is a very big deal. I've been covering this a little bit the last week and a half, 2 weeks. It is getting worse. I'm going to explain at the end of this video how this is going to affect the US dollar, how it can affect gold, and a lot of things. I believe you are going to see fireworks in Japan. You know what? I got to throw it's bright out here, sorry. It is going to send fireworks through the nation of Japan and reverberate all the way to the United States. I'm going to try and break this down as simply as possible for you because the bond market is a very hard thing to understand, but what people do need to understand is the bond market is the market. It's not just the stock market, it's not just the bond market. The bond market controls everything, right? We are talking about debt, the interest paid on debt, when debt is due. The bond market absolutely is vital to the health of the bond market, vital to the health of the nation's economy and the world's economy, okay? So here we go. First off, let me start with, we're gonna talk about the emergency margin call in just a second, but I wanna rehash what happened just a couple of days ago, sending a shockwave down to the US dollar, sending the US dollar lower, gold and silver spiked, and we are seeing losses across the board in Japan right now because of what the Bank of Japan did a couple days ago. So let me rehash this, let me bring this up. Bank of Japan shocks global markets with bond yield shift. This was dated on the 20th of December. Just the key points we're gonna go over. The Bank of Japan caught markets off guard by tweaking the yield curve control policy to allow the yield on the 10-year Japanese government bond to move 50 basis points to either side of the of its 0% target. Okay, so it allowed it to float 50 basis points, positive or negative, along their 0% target. Okay, that's the Bank of Japan. It says in its policy statement, the BOJ, or Bank of Japan, said the move is intended to improve market functioning and encourage a smoother formation of the entire yield curve while maintaining accommodative financial conditions, okay? They need that 50-point basis of that move either direction to be able to manipulate markets, if you will. With them being able to do that, they can manipulate markets in a way that you don't exactly feel the shock, right? But there's more to it than that. Let me go in. It says right here, the central bank caught markets off guard, tweaking its yield curve control policy to allow the 10-year bond to move 50 basis points to either side of its 0% target. We already said that. But this is up from 25 basis points previously. Now you'd think to yourself that that's not that big of it's double, but it's not that big of a deal, right? Going from 25 basis points equals 1/4 of 1%, right? Now they're just moving it to half of 1% on either side. You're like, that really isn't that big of a deal, but it did make big ripples. In a move aimed at cushioning the effects of protracted monetary stimulus measures, all right? It said the central bank introduced its yield curve control mechanism in September of 2016 with the intention of lifting inflation towards its 2% target after the prolonged period of economic stagflation and ultra-low inflation. Remember, guys, a little side note, the 2% target was what the Federal Reserve wanted also, and they were having a hard time getting up there, right? But then all of a sudden, it not only hit 2%, it went over, and then we saw the catastrophic effects of inflation, and it just took off, right? I believe you're about to see that in Japan. It said, an outlier, the BOJ, an outlier compared with most major central banks, also left its benchmark interest rate unchanged at negative 0.1% on Tuesday and vowed to significantly increase the rate of its 10-year government bond purchases, retaining its ultra-low monetary policy stance. They are still, think about it, in quantitative easing. They are literally having to continually intervene in that economy to keep it propped up. To say that the Japanese economy is on life support, and this is where it's about to really hurt the US dollar, is an understatement. All right, so now let's jump over to Twitter, and this just came out, and this is from the Peruvian Bull. If you haven't followed me on Twitter, it's at Economy Ninja or at Economic Ninja. I got 2 channels over there, but this is Peruvian Bull, and he just came out and said, Japanese Securities Clearing Corporation issues an emergency margin call. Now I'm going to go through a couple of the comments and make it very interesting for you to understand because he hits up Santiago Fund and he says this, interesting development here for the Japanese. Wonder who's getting caught on the wrong side of the short 10-year trade. Now he's a little confused on that one because Santiago Capital came back and said, do you mean long 10-year Japanese government bonds? And he said, yeah, I totally screwed that one up. Now this is what I want want people to understand. It says, can you help me? This is a question. Can you help me understand this better as if I'm 5 years old? It is the bearish. Is this bearish to the markets, and how does it affect the DXY? I decided to answer that in this video, and this is why. It's very bearish. A little while ago, Japan came out and they said, we are having a problem with our currency. It is falling rapidly to the US dollar. The Bank of Japan came out and said, we need to do something and intervene in our markets, in our currency markets, to prop up our currency because it is failing versus the US dollar, right? The dollar is still the benchmark. Compared to all these other countries, it's still the benchmark. Even though it is the best smelling turd in the punch bowl, they're all smelly, they're all falling together. The dollar is gaining value recently because the Federal Reserve decided to start propping up interest rates, right? They're all falling. But then what happens is this. Because of inflation, all the other currencies started falling more rapid compared to the dollar because the Federal Reserve intervened in its own currency by increasing interest rates. You see, when you increase the value of your interest rate market, when you give more money back to people that decide to hold on to currency, hold on to dollars, right? It encourages people to hold even more dollars, right? Well, here's the problem. Even though the Federal Reserve raised their interest rates super aggressively since this last spring, it is still well under inflation, all right? We know that the Federal Reserve, in order to get on top of inflation, must raise the Federal Reserve funds rate to near to or at the actual rate of inflation, not any of this government metrics crap, because we know that that's all a lie. It doesn't take into consideration the real inflation for food, the real inflation for oil, gasoline, things like that, electricity, stuff like that. The real things that you and I care about, right? All right, so we know that it's got to keep going up. But even in the meantime, the Federal Reserve raised its interest rate from, 0 to 25 basis points to where it is now. Very steep incline. Well, what that did is that made a lot of people start to hold dollars. And they would, other currencies, third world countries, and even some developing nations or developed nations like Japan, they're going, our currency is losing value. So what are we going to do? They made an announcement a few weeks ago that they are looking to now start to sell their treasury bills, their US bonds. They have a certain amount. Every country in this world has a certain amount of bonds, right? Some have a lot, some have a little. If you look at China and Russia, and this is where we're going to get to, it's very serious that people understand this. They have a ton. Japan goes, we're going to need to start selling some of our bonds to prop up our own currency. Take the proceeds from those sales and prop up our currency. Well, here's the problem. If they become a seller, a net seller of our bonds, it will cause our 10-year bond price to spike. And it did a handful of weeks ago. It caused gold to push up in value because the dollar dropped because all of a sudden they started looking at it. The yield on the 10-year bond just came screaming down when Japan announced that, all right? So now we have Japan, a couple days ago, intervening in their interest rates, are changing it up, right? They're letting it float a little bit greater because there are problems right now. Well, now that problem has led to a margin call, all right? A margin call has been called because obviously a fund or a handful of funds were in there betting big on margin against or for the Japanese 10-year bond, right? And that shockwave caused them to go into a margin call. I believe in the next 2 or 3 weeks, you're about to see massive margin calls in Japan. And Japan is going to have to literally go all in on fixing their economy. I believe you're going to see the Federal Reserve issue an emergency swap line between Japan, or whatever they're doing right now behind the scenes is going to get a lot bigger. I think you're going to see the repo window open up wide. It's already open at the Federal Reserve, but it is going to open wide. And you're going to see way more countries outside of just Switzerland and Japan needing money, needing these swap lines, the banks needing these repos, emergency repo lines opened up. This is going to cause, in the next 3 to 4 weeks, you're going to see ripples throughout the nation's, the world's economic system. The truth is, views are super low on all media platforms around the world. Right now, since the 1st of November, the world has gone into a malaise, if you will. And this is the greatest time because the elites understand also that when people aren't watching, you could get a lot of things taken care of behind the scenes, if you know what I mean. And this is the time for certain people to be acting. Now, what am I doing in all of this? I am preparing for an epic collapse in 2023. Worldwide markets. I believe it's going to be epic. I think it is going to be a great opportunity for gold. This isn't financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. I put my money in gold. I also have a good amount of cash on the side to take advantage of deflationary downturns in the economy. Not all at once, but these spikes down of panic. So I have gold, I have silver, I have cash. I also am looking at also getting out of debt, right? I only have one debt personally. But that's what I'm telling other people. If they ask, what can I do? Stop paying massive amounts of interest to the bank and start paying yourself, putting money in your pocket by paying off that debt. That is the number one thing you could do because you want to be positioned to take advantage of this crash. And mark my words, by the end of January, you are all going to be able to sit back and go, the ninja said something big was happening in Japan and the Federal Reserve was going to have to bail them out, and it was going to start like a fire, a flame that was going to ignite world markets around the world in 2023. You watch, it'll happen. All right, guys, I hope this answered some questions. If it didn't, ask them down below. I'll keep my eye out for them. With that being said, the Economic Ninja is out.